The night did not feel right. That was the first thing the hunter noticed when consciousness returned. Not the cold pressing against worn leather. Not the distant hum of a city that did not belong to any century they remembered. It was the silence beneath the silence. The absence of something that had clung to them for what felt like 1,000 lifetimes. The whispers were gone. For so long, those whispers had been a second heartbeat. The murmurs of things watching from beyond the veil. The soft laughter of beings who wore the shape of gods. In Yharnam, the air itself had been thick with their presence, a perfume of blood and incense and madness curling through every cobblestone street. But here, wherever here was, the sky was empty. The moon hung above without hunger. The stars did not blink with intent. And yet the hunter knew. They knew the way a wolf knows winter is coming. They knew the way a blade knows it has not yet finished cutting. This world was not safe. It only pretended to be. They rose slowly from the wet pavement of an alley that smelled of rain and oil and something faintly metallic. Towers of glass climbed into the dark above them, lit from within by lights that flickered like trapped fireflies. Vehicles moved on distant streets, low and fast and humming with a power the hunter did not recognize. This was not Yharnam. This was not the nightmare. This was somewhere else entirely, somewhere newer. Somewhere that believed itself to be modern, civilized, awake. The hunter almost smiled. Every world believed that, until the truth came for it. They walked without sound, the saw cleaver resting against their hip, the trick weapon at their back still warm with the memory of the last beast it had felt. The hunter did not know how they had come here. They only knew that the dream had released them, or perhaps cast them out, and that something inside them recognized the rhythm of this place. Beneath the neon and the engines and the careless laughter of mortals stumbling out of taverns, there was a current. A familiar one, moving in the dark. The hunter followed it. They found them 3 streets later in a forgotten lot behind a row of warehouses. 6 figures, broad-shouldered and crouched, their eyes catching the streetlight in flashes of yellow. Their jaws were too long. Their fingers ended in claws that scraped softly against the concrete. They were tearing into something that had once been a man, and they did so without urgency, without shame, the way creatures behave when they have grown used to the idea that no one is watching. The hunter watched. For a long moment they simply studied the creatures. The shape of their movement, the weight of their breath, the way their muscles coiled beneath fur and flesh. These were not the twisted, screaming beasts of Yharnam. These things were organized, disciplined, almost soldierly. It did not matter. When the hunter stepped into the lot, the first creature was already dead before it understood it had been seen. The saw cleaver opened it from shoulder to hip in a single clean arc. The others turned, snarling, their eyes wide with the surprise of predators who have never been hunted. They lunged. They were fast. The hunter was faster. What happened in that lot lasted less than a minute. When it ended, the hunter stood alone among 6 steaming bodies, breathing slowly, listening to a city that had not noticed a thing. By morning the news would travel. It would pass through vampire courts and Lycan dens, through whispered phone calls and ancient channels of communication older than the languages of men. A new player, an unknown faction had drawn first blood. They had no idea what had truly entered their world. They would learn. The hunter did not sleep. Sleep, in the way mortals understood it, had become a foreign country long ago. Instead, they observed, from rooftops slick with rain, from the shadows of cathedrals that no longer remembered why they had been built, from the quiet corners of train stations where the living rushed past without ever looking up. The hunter watched this world the way a physician watches a patient who does not yet know they are sick. And slowly the shape of the disease became clear. There were 2 species here. 2 predators wearing the skins of legend. The first were the wolves. The hunter learned the name the locals gave them. They were not the mindless beasts of Yharnam, frothing and broken and lost to their own hunger. These creatures held formations. They posted scouts. They communicated in low growls and human speech alike, and they answered to leaders who carried themselves with the gravity of generals. They had safe houses beneath the city, tunnels older than the buildings above. They mourned their dead. They remembered their grudges. The hunter respected that, in the way one respects a well-made blade. The second species was harder to find, and that alone told the hunter everything they needed to know. The vampires did not hunt in alleys. They did not feed in the open. They lived in towers of marble and steel, in estates hidden behind names of old money, in private clubs where the music was soft and the wine was redder than it should have been. They moved among humanity like shepherds moving among sheep, and the sheep called them benefactors, patrons, friends. The vampires had learned the most dangerous lesson a predator can learn. They had learned how to be loved. The hunter understood both, because the hunter had been both. They began their work quietly. A Lycan hunting party disappeared near the eastern docks. No bodies were found. Only claw marks scoring the inside of a shipping container, as though something had tried to climb out and failed. 3 nights later, a vampire scout sent to investigate the docks did not return. Her partner found only her coat, folded neatly on a bench, with a single silver bullet placed on top of it. The bullet had not been fired. It had been left. I know what you are. I know what kills you. Rumors began to spread the way fire spreads through dry grass. In the underground markets where supernatural creatures traded favors and secrets, the whispers grew. A new figure. A ghost in a long coat. Weapons that should not exist. A blade that unfolded into a saw. A pistol that fired something stranger than lead. Some said the figure was a man. Some said a woman. Some said neither, and some said both. No one had seen the face. No one ever would. The vampire elders in their high rooms above the city frowned over reports. The Lycan alphas in their hidden dens sharpened their claws. Each side assumed the other had created something new. An experiment. A monster bred for the war that had already lasted longer than any of them could clearly remember. Accusations flew across the ancient battle line. Old grudges flared. The conflict between vampire and Lycan, which had simmered for centuries, began to boil once more. And in the center of it all, the hunter moved. They did not feel hatred. They did not feel triumph. They felt only the cold, familiar rhythm of the hunt. Find the prey. Study the prey. In the prey. Move on. There was a strange peace in it, a peace the hunter had not known they were missing until the whispers of the great ones had fallen silent at last. But peace the hunter knew was always a warning. Peace meant something else was coming. And somewhere in a vampire stronghold high above the city, a woman in black leather was being shown a file. Her gloved fingers turned the pages slowly. Her pale eyes narrowed. Celine had a new name to learn. Celine had hunted Lycans for 600 years. She had seen the war change shape a dozen times. She had buried lovers and elders and entire bloodlines. She had walked through battles that history would never record, beneath moons that had watched her kill without ever once judging her for it. She believed, in the quiet way that very old creatures come to believe things, that there was nothing left in this world that could truly surprise her. The file changed that. She read it 3 times in the back of a moving car, the city lights sliding across the pages in pale yellow bands. Lycan hunting parties wiped out without a single vampire trace. Scout teams vanishing without struggle. Weapons that did not match any known armory, vampire or otherwise. Wounds that did not heal, on creatures whose bodies were built to heal from almost anything. And in every account, every grainy photograph, every shaking witness statement, the same impossible figure. A long coat, a wide hat, a blade that should have been clumsy and was somehow not. Celine closed the file. A new player had entered the war. She intended to know who. It took her 11 nights to find them. 11 nights of tracing patterns the way she had once traced bloodlines, of leaning on contacts both willing and unwilling, of standing in the empty places where the figure had been and trying to feel the weight of the silence they had left behind. The figure did not move like a Lycan. They did not move like a vampire. They moved like something that had decided, a very long time ago, that the rules of this war did not apply to them. She found them on a bridge. It was almost morning. The river below was black and slow, and the city across the water was beginning to glow with the first pale promise of dawn. The hunter stood at the rail, one gloved hand resting lightly on the iron, the other holding a strange firearm Celine had never seen the like of. They did not turn when she approached. They had heard her long before she reached the bridge. Of that she was certain. She stopped 10 paces away. Her own pistols hung loose in her hands, not raised, not lowered. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then the hunter turned their head, only slightly, just enough to acknowledge her existence, and Celine felt something she had not felt in centuries. She felt watched, not studied, not hunted. The way a doctor watches a wound to see if it will close. The way a craftsman watches a piece of metal to see if it will hold. There was no hatred in those eyes. There was no fear. There was only attention, vast and patient, and entirely without the heat of any emotion Celine knew how to name. "You are not Lycan," she said. The hunter did not answer. "You are not one of us," she said. The hunter still did not answer. But the smallest tilt of the head, the smallest motion, told her that they had heard, and that the question itself amused them in a quiet, distant way. She lowered her weapons. She did not know why. Perhaps because she understood in that moment that raising them would have changed nothing. If this figure had wanted her dead, she would have been dead before she stepped onto the bridge. "What are you?" she asked. The hunter looked back out across the river. When they finally spoke, their voice was low and worn, and carried the cadence of someone who had not used language for a long time and had not missed it. "A hunter," they said, "of whatever needs to be hunted." Celine felt the dawn touch her skin. She should have moved. She did not. She stood on the bridge beside this stranger and watched the light come. And as the river turned from black to gray to slow molten gold, she began, against every instinct she had ever trusted, to ask questions. The hunter answered some of them, not all. They spoke of a city that had drowned in its own blood, of a moon that had wept, of churches that worshipped things older than churches, of gods that wore the bodies of insects and the voices of children, of dreams that did not end when you woke. Celine listened, and for the first time in 600 years, the vampire warrior who had buried lovers and elders and entire bloodlines wondered if her long, terrible war had been only a small story told inside a much larger nightmare. She had no idea how right she was. The first body was found in a Lycan den beneath the old subway lines. He had been a young one, barely 2 decades into his transformation, strong and loyal and dull-witted in the way the young always are. His pack found him curled against the wall of his sleeping chamber, and at first they thought he was simply ill. Some sickness of the lungs, perhaps, some weakness of the blood. They did not understand at first why his hands looked wrong, why his fingers seemed to have one knuckle too many, why his mouth, when they finally turned him over, opened sideways instead of down. Then he began to laugh. He laughed for 6 hours. He laughed in a voice that was not his own. He laughed in a language none of them had ever heard, and yet some of them, the older ones, the wiser ones, began to weep without knowing why. When the laughter finally stopped, the young Lycan was dead. But the thing inside him was not. It crawled out of his mouth on too many legs and disappeared into the dark of the tunnels before anyone thought to strike at it. The pack burned the body. They burned the chamber. They burned everything. It did not help. Across the city, in a vampire estate of glass and marble, a coven elder collapsed during a council meeting. Her skin split along her spine, neatly as though unzipped. From the opening, something dark and wet pulled itself free, and the eyes it opened were not the eyes of any creature born of this world. The vampires destroyed it. It cost them 4 of their best. More reports came. More victims. Lycans whose fur fell out in patches and whose bones twisted into spirals. Vampires whose hunger turned strange, who began to feed on things they should not have been able to feed on: light, sound, memory. Humans, ordinary humans with no place in the secret war, found in alleyways with their faces folded inward, their bodies arranged in patterns that mathematicians would have recognized and screamed at. Celine brought the reports to the hunter. The hunter read them in silence. Then they closed the folder, very gently, and set it down on the table. And Celine watched something move across that calm, weathered face that she had not seen there before. Not fear. Not exactly. Something older than fear. The expression of a man who has recognized an old enemy in a new coat. "It followed me," the hunter said. Celine waited. The thing that took my world. The sickness. The dream beneath the dream. It found a thread and it followed me through. Through what? The hunter looked up. Their eyes, in the low light of the safe house, seemed for a moment to hold something else inside them. A reflection of a moon Celine had never seen. "Through the wound," they said. "Every hunt opens one." I thought I had closed mine. Celine felt the cold settle into her bones in a way that 600 years of winters had never managed. She had spent her life fighting Lycans. She had spent her life believing that her war was the war, that the conflict between her kind and theirs was the secret beneath the world. Now this stranger was telling her, with the calm of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, that her war had always been the smaller story, that something vast and patient and utterly indifferent had been waiting just beyond the edge of her reality for a door to open. A door he had brought with him. She wanted to be angry. She found she could not be. The hunter had not chosen this. The hunter had only survived something she could not yet imagine, and the survival itself had carried the disease forward. Blaming him for that would be like blaming a drowning man for the water on his clothes. "What do we do?" she asked. The hunter rose. They reached for the saw cleaver. They reached for the hat that hung beside the door. "We hunt," they said. But this time they were not hunting monsters. This time they were trying to stop an apocalypse. The meeting took place in a place that should not have existed. A vault, 300 feet beneath the city, built during a century no living human remembered. Vampires had laid its stones. Lycans had broken into it twice and been driven back. By unspoken agreement, neither side had ever claimed it. It had remained, through all the long centuries of their war, the one piece of ground where their hatred could pause long enough for words to be exchanged. It had not been used in over 100 years. Celine used it now. She brought vampires of the old bloodlines, elders with eyes like polished stones and mouths that did not remember how to smile. She brought warriors. She brought scholars. She brought everyone she could still trust, and a few she could not. From the other side of the vault, through the heavy iron doors that had not opened in lifetimes, came the Lycans. Their alphas in worn leather, their wise ones in furs. Their young, snarling and uncertain, kept on short leashes by elders who remembered what the war had cost them. And in the center of the chamber, beneath a hanging lamp older than every soul in the room, stood the hunter. They did not speak first. Celine spoke first. She told them what she had seen. She told them what was coming. She told them that the war they had fought for centuries was about to become irrelevant, because the world they had been fighting over was about to be eaten. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Then the hunter spoke. They spoke quietly. They spoke briefly. They described the sickness and the shape of it and the price of ignoring it. They did not promise victory. They did not promise survival. They promised only that without unity there would be nothing left to argue over. No territory, no bloodline, no moons to howl at, no nights to walk through. Only the long, patient laughter of something that had already won in 100 other worlds, and would win here too if it was not stopped. The arguments came after. They were ugly. They were bitter. A Lycan elder accused the hunter of bringing the corruption himself. He was not wrong, and the hunter did not deny it. A vampire counselor demanded that the hunter be killed at once, before the corruption spread further through him. Celine answered her with a look that ended the question. Old grudges surfaced. Old murders were named. For a moment, the meeting threatened to collapse into the very war it had been called to suspend. It was a young Lycan who saved it. He stepped forward, no more than 30 years into his life, and he held up a hand that had 3 fingers too many. The corruption had taken him already, slowly, quietly, and he had hidden it from his pack for as long as he could. He showed them what he was becoming. He asked them, in a voice that still sounded almost human, whether they were going to argue about old wars while this happened to their children. No one answered. The alliance was sealed in silence. In the weeks that followed, the city changed. Vampires and Lycans who had killed each other on sight for centuries began to move together. Awkwardly, distrustfully, but together. The hunter led them. They did not ask for the role. It came to them the way authority sometimes comes to the only person in a burning building who has seen a fire before. They taught the vampires how to recognize the corruption in its early stages. They taught the Lycans which wounds would heal and which would only spread. They taught both how to kill the things that were beginning to crawl out of the cracks in reality. The campaigns were brutal. In an abandoned hospital on the city's edge, the hunter led a strike team against something that had been a doctor and was now a great wet flower of mouths. In the subway tunnels, they burned a nest of crawling shapes that whispered in the voices of dead children. In a penthouse high above the river, they cut down a thing that had once been a senator and now bled light. Every victory revealed something worse waiting behind it. Every door they closed showed them another, larger, already opening. And above the city, slowly, the moon began to change. It happened over the course of a single week. At first no one noticed. The moon rose as it always had, full one night, slim the next, indifferent to the small wars of the creatures beneath it. But the hunter noticed. The hunter had always noticed moons. They had stood beneath too many of them, in too many worlds, to mistake the small wrongness when it began. A slight tilt of the light, a faint shimmer at the edges. The way the shadows it cast began, very gently, to fall in directions that did not match the buildings that had thrown them. By the third night, the dogs of the city were screaming. By the fifth night, the children were drawing it. In schools across the city, teachers found the same image scrawled in the margins of notebooks. A moon with too many craters. A moon with the suggestion beneath its surface of an eye. The children did not know each other. They had not spoken. They drew it anyway, and when their parents asked them why, they shrugged and said it had told them to. By the seventh night, every supernatural creature in the city understood. Something had anchored itself above the world. The hunter brought Celine to a rooftop that had a clear view of the sky. He pointed. He did not need to say anything. She looked up, and for the first time in her long life, she felt small. Not in the way a soldier feels small before a larger army. In the way a candle feels small before the dawn. The thing in the sky was not yet fully visible. It was still pretending to be a moon. But beneath that pretense, something vast was sliding into place, fitting itself against the bones of reality, beginning, with a patience older than any species, to push. "It is called a great one," the hunter said. "What does it want?" Celine asked. The hunter was quiet for a while. "It does not want," they said. "That is the mistake mortals make. They think these things hunger or hate or desire. They do not. They simply are. And where they are, reality bends to match them. The world is not being attacked. The world is being rewritten." Celine watched the sky. "Can it be killed?" The hunter did not answer immediately. When they did, their voice was lower than she had ever heard it. "Everything can be killed," they said. "But every hunt has a price." They began to prepare. There was no army that could march against what waited above. There was no fortress that could hold against it. There were only the few who understood what was happening, and the strange weapons of a stranger from another world, and the desperate, ugly hope that the price of stopping this would be one they could still afford to pay. The hunter spent the final nights teaching. They taught Celine rituals from a city she would never see. They taught the Lycan elders how to anchor themselves against madness. They taught the vampire scholars words that should not have existed in this universe, and warned them never to speak those words aloud once the battle was over. They moved through the alliance like a quiet flame, leaving each warrior a little stronger, a little more ready, a little closer to the line they would have to cross. Celine watched the hunter work, and she began to understand something she had not allowed herself to understand before. The hunter did not expect to survive. It was not in their word. It was in their stillness, in the way they cleaned their weapons each evening with the unhurried care of a man preparing a tool for a final use, in the way they looked at Celine, sometimes when they thought she could not see, with the soft regret of someone memorizing a face they did not expect to see again. She did not ask. She knew he would not lie, and she did not want to hear the truth. Above them the moon thickened. The world held its breath. And somewhere in the deepest part of the hunter, the old, calm voice of the dream whispered, one last time, that the hunt was not yet finished. The sky tore open at dusk. It did not split with thunder. It did not split with fire. It split the way old cloth splits, quietly, almost politely, and through the wound came a light that was not light, falling across the city in a color no human eye had been built to see. Buildings bent. Streets stretched. People in their homes looked up from their dinners and forgot, in a single soft instant, the names of their own children. Beneath that sky the Alliance marched. Vampires in dark coats. Lycans in half-transformed shapes, fur and muscle and snarling discipline. Humans, a handful of them, the brave and the doomed, who had been told the truth and had chosen to stand anyway. They moved through streets that no longer obeyed geometry, past statues that wept and lamps that whispered, toward the place where the hunter had said the Great One had set its anchor. At the center of them walked the hunter. They did not speak. They did not look back. The saw cleaver rested easy in their hand. The trick pistol hung loose at their side. They walked the way they had walked through 100 Yharnam nights, the way they had walked through dreams that should have broken them, with the calm gait of someone who had long ago made peace with the road. The battle, when it came, was not a battle in any way the Underworld had ever known. Vampires fought beside Lycans against things that wore the bodies of friends. Reality flickered. Time stuttered. Celine fired her pistols into a shape that had been a vampire elder an hour before and was now a great soft wheel of teeth. And beside her a Lycan she had once tried to kill held the line with her, and neither of them spoke of it, because there was no time, and because there was nothing to say. At the heart of it the hunter climbed. They climbed toward the Great One the way a man climbs a mountain in a storm, one step at a time, refusing the wind. The thing above them was vast beyond meaning. It had no face. It had no shape. It only had presence, an endless, patient presence that filled the sky and the mind at once. The hunter did not look at it directly. They did not need to. They had hunted gods before. They knew how it was done. What happened on that final climb no witness ever fully described. Celine saw flashes. The hunter, small and dark, against a horizon of impossible color. A weapon raised. A wound opened in something that should not have been able to bleed. A sound that was not a sound, a vibration through the bones of the world, as something old and patient and certain realized, for the first time in its long existence, that it had been touched. Then the sky closed. The color faded. The buildings remembered their shapes. The streets remembered their lines. The moon, when it rose again, was only a moon. The hunter was gone. They searched. Of course they searched. Celine led the search herself, through the rubble and the silence and the slow returning of the ordinary world. They found the saw cleaver resting on a stone, clean. They found the wide hat set carefully beside it. They found no body. Some said he had died and the dream had taken him home. Some said he had stepped through one last door into one last hunt and was walking now beneath a moon none of them would ever see. Celine stood at the river as the dawn came. She did not cry. Vampires of her age did not cry easily. But she stood there a long time, watching the sun rise on a world that was still standing, and she wondered, in the quiet way old creatures wonder things, whether the stranger who had saved them had ever truly been human at all. Above her in some unseen sky the whispers began again, soft, patiently, because nightmares never disappear forever.